Okay. Oh, all right. So what we're going to do, we want to use a way to memorize or remember, okay, our page size preferences. And along with this, we'll eventually have the system remember everything, right? But for now, we'll start with this, okay? So we're going to use cookies. Now, cookies have had a bad rap for a few years now, right? For a while there, everyone got paranoid about cookies, but now people seem to understand more because most sites actually come along and they'll ask you what cookies you're willing to allow. And people are aware now that there's such a thing as functional cookies, right? Cookies that the website depends on, right? So as I mentioned here, in terms of cookies, uh, any Canadian website allows purchase of goods and services in euros, or the deliverers to European citizens, okay, has to comply with the GDPR, right? Go ahead and look that up. I've got instructions here, right, to add cookie consent if you really want to. But at this point in time, these are basically functional cookies. Okay, so it's not something you really have to worry about getting permission according to the laws in Canada at this point in time. So I'm not going to worry about adding that. We're just going to go ahead and add these functional cookies to our system, right? So whenever you're working with cookies, it's always nice to have a helper, right? So this, again, I didn't write this. I can't take credit for it. This is right out of the Microsoft tutorial. We're just going to add this, okay, cookie helper class. So it makes sense. I'm going to add it again to my utilities. So coming to the utilities, I'll right click. We will add a class called cookie helper. And I'll just get the code in place. Okay, it's a static class. Okay, it just sets a cookie, right? Notice the parameters here. We need the HTTP context to work with. Well, the controller has one, so we'll just pass it in here, right? And it works on a key value pair. Wow, that's not new, right? We've done work with all different kinds of collections and dictionaries and so on before that are basically key value pairs. One thing that's kind of unique here about a cookie is there's also an expire time, an expiration time, right? So that's something that we actually create the cookie options object in order to provide that expire time, right? So basically we can pass that in as a parameter. So we can specify when we ask this cookie helper to set a cookie for us, we can specify how long we want the cookie to last, right? I typically, in terms of operation, I'll do with something like 30 minutes, because if you've gone away for more than half an hour, odds are you want to reset your values anyway, right? But you can change that. It's entirely up to you. Notice the logic here. If expire time has a value, we'll use it. If it doesn't, we're going to go with a very, very short time span, because we can't have nothing, right? We have to have some value here. So we're going to add 10 milliseconds, which is pretty short, but short enough to still allow us to make the cookie, right? So basically, how do you make a cookie? Well, we know that the whole web runs on request response cycles, right? So in the response, we can just go to the cookies collection and append or add a cookie, okay? All we have to do is pass the key and value, right? And that cookie option object, okay, which of course contains the expire time. And it's really as simple as that. And now we've added a cookie, and we'll be able to access that cookie because it will be contained in the request that comes in whenever the user clicks a link or a button on our page, right? Okay, so we're going to need the cookie helper, but you know what? I need yet another helper here. I'm going to actually add a class. I'm going to call it as a helper, page size helper, right? So I'm going to add that class here into utilities as well. So it's going to be my page size helper. Okay, it once again will be a static class, and I'll just get my code for it first. I think I'm missing a curly brace here in my copy paste file. I'm not quite sure. Let me just see. Yeah, see, obviously I'm missing a curly brace there because I've got that red squiggle. And if I did a build, sometimes it's a really good practice. Do a build every once in a while, especially when you're copying and pasting code here and there, because we all make these little boo-boos. Okay, so you see I'm expecting yet another curly brace, right? So there was supposed to be one in my copy paste file. There you go. I'm keeping you on your toes. I did it on purpose. No, I didn't. Anyway, try to be honest. All right. Okay, so here's my page size helper. So again, gets the page size coming from either the select control. Yes, remember we talked about modals. So in our little pop-up modal, we'll give them a drop-down list where they can choose a page size, right? So it could be that they've done that, and that's where we're getting our new value for the page size, right? But if it's not in the select control, well, then we'll check our cookie. Maybe it's an existing preference they've already set for their page size, right? And if we don't get it from either the select control or the cookie, we'll just set it to our own default. And in my code here, I'm setting it to a default of 5. Feel free to change that if you like, right? So my parameters, again, we need the HTTP context and page size ID. Okay, well, looking at that ID, that reminds us that whenever we created other selects, like for our foreign keys for doctor, for example, on patient, it was called doctor ID, right? So page size ID is actually the name of the select control, right? And that's how we'll get the value from what they choose out of that drop-down list. Okay. All right, so those are my two parameters at this point. So I prepare an integer to hold the page size. I see if my select control, my drop-down list had a value. If it did, good, okay? Then I'll get it from there. I'll get value or default will give me the value currently selected in page size ID, and I use that, okay? And while we're here though, we're gonna save it to what? To a cookie. So the system can remember what their preferred page size was, right? So I'll call my cookie helper, we'll set the cookie, pass in the context, okay? Page size value will be the key to the key value pair, right? And then page size, two-stringing it, okay, will be the value stored for that in the cookie. I'm setting it to 30 minutes, right? Change that value if you want something different, okay? Now the else branch is, right, basically it wasn't something a user just selected from our drop-down list. So it was not selected. So let's go see if it is in the cookie already. Maybe they already did this once and they've saved that value. So I'll go to the request and the cookies. I ask for the value just by using the name, okay, of the key value pair. And then that will give me my page size, right? Converting it to an integer, right? Because it comes actually technically everything in a cookie is a string, right? Okay. All right, so that's two different ways that I might get a value. If I didn't get it from either one, then if it's still 0, then I'll just set it to my default value of 5. Okay, of course, if it has a value, I'll just use whatever value is in it, right? Okay, all right, so that is all I really need in here, but I figured this was a good spot as well to add this, okay? I'm going to be able to call my page size list here to go and generate this select list. Now here's the first time so far, all of our select lists that we've used in our application have always been coming from a link query, right? Where we get the data and we specify, what's the value and what's the text to display and so on, right? But a select list doesn't have to get data from a database. We can just provide something as simple as this array of strings, and that will be the data that we show then in our select list, right? So again, I just kind of came up with these values the first time I did this, and I haven't seen a need to change it from this, but you can come up with any range of values you want to appear in your drop-down list, right? So that's all I'm going to do here is this just gives me the ability to easily ask for this select list, to provide it to the view so that when they have that pop-up modal, we can actually have data in our drop-down list. Moving on, next steps, okay? All right, so in the shared folder, okay, we need yet another partial view, right, for our page size modal, okay? So we're gonna have data ready for the modal, but we actually have to have the modal on the page too. So if I come down here to shared, because I'm gonna reuse it for multiple different entities, we'll add yet another partial view, okay? The name will be page size modal, because it will produce that little modal pop-up dialog box. Again, created as a partial view. No, I don't need a template or a model for it. So I'll just go ahead and create it this way. Okay. Again, I can just replace these comments that are in here with the actual code. Now I do have a comment up here, just reminding me this is our modal, right? So notice we're using, if you follow along with the Bootstrap tutorial on how to use a modal, right? Classes modal fade, right? So we see a lot of that in here. Role is dialogue, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so we have the modal dialogue, we have the modal content, we have a modal header. All these classes, Bootstrap classes, help make it look the way we actually need it to. Then in the header, okay, I have my modal title, which just says page, set page size. And then this button, well, that's the little X in the upper right corner, right? Notice its role is Bootstrap dismiss, okay, of the modal, right? And then we just actually have that little time symbol as the X that shows up in the span up here in the actual button itself, right? Okay, then in the modal body, okay, we have a little form group here. We have an input group, right? So we're prepending page size, okay? That puts this nice little, that's why it kind of looks like it's all one control, right? We'll have page size at this prepended input group. And then inside the input group itself, we have our drop-down list. So this is using the same HTML helper we used when we created our filters. Remember this one? Okay, so the page size ID, well, that's the data, okay? And it's also, of course, then we'll carry the value back to the controller when we submit this, right? Okay, it's just styled using Bootstrap form control, and away we go. So we have our input type is submit, okay? Value is set page size. So whenever we show this, we can dismiss it, or we can actually select a new page size, and that's it, away we go. Now, of course, we have to get this on the page, right? So we could do a separate partial to add this to the actual view, but you know what? We can embed, right? One partial view can contain other partial views. So let's revisit our paging navbar, right? Because this actually could use some updating now, and I actually have a new version in my code. So let me actually, I could mess around with this, but it's probably safer in the demo to replace it. But let me note that the first thing I'm going to add inside my new version of my paging navbar is, okay, this partial to use calling page size modal, right? So even though this itself is a partial view, it can incorporate other partial views. And that way I don't have to worry about going back to the pages where I had it already, right? My page size modal. Okay, I'm sorry, my paging navbar, right? Because it'll just include it along with it. Okay, now let me get the rest of the code, because we do have a few other things I've added here as well, right? Expanded what this can actually do for us. Okay, so we're more properly handling a couple situations. What if there's no data? No data whatsoever to show, right? Well, that can happen, especially if you have filters and things like that, right? It can easily happen. So if total pages is 0, that means there's no data to show, right? So, I'm not going to have a whole bunch of links. I'll just have one in the center here, this button, and it will just have this caption, no data to show, right? And that's basically all there is. Now we still have our title here. Click to change page size, right? And our modal, because you can, still click this to change the page size. I'm still going to have that functionality, even though at the moment I have no data to show, right? Now my else if, we have one page. That's it. We have some data, but we don't have any need for navigation to other pages because at the moment there are no other pages to go to, right? So again, I'll just have the button, but this time I might as well show page index of total pages, even though nudge, nudge, wink, wink, there's only one page. So it'll say page 1 of 1, right? But that's okay. That's exactly what we do need it to show. And again, we'll have the ability here, right? The toggle is modal, right? Our target is our page size modal. So you can click this button to bring up the actual modal to change page size. All right, so our else branch is we have more than one page. So yeah, we might as well have our buttons then. But you know what? I thought about this a little bit more. These are the 2 lines of code we had already, to disable going forward or backwards if there is no more data, right? If you're already on the last page, you can't go forward. If you're on the first page, you can't go back. But you know what? When you have a large number of pages, I found it a little frustrating, and most users do as well, if your only choice is to go forward one page at a time, right? Or jump to the very end. So if you have 187 pages, okay, to step through only one at a time, what if you want to get to around, I don't know, page 140 before you get to the data you're after, right? Then it'd be pretty frustrating to have to click that button to jump through one page at a time all the way through. Jumping to the end and going back might be shorter, but how would you know, right? So what I've done here is I'm going to determine a jump amount, right? So I'm figured if you've got more than 25 pages in total, then you probably want to jump by at least 10 pages at a time. Click a button to go 10 pages. If you have less than 25 in total, then I figure jump 5 pages at a time. that's a reasonable number, right? So I'm setting my jump amount based on that understanding of what the total pages are. Then I come up with two amounts, my step back and step forward amounts, right? So based on the page index and how close we are with our jump amount, okay, I'm going to set that I'm going to either go 1 or the page index minus the jump amount, etc. So basically what that's doing for us is we're going to do our jump amount if we have that many pages available. If there's less, so say I'm only 3 pages from the end, but my jump amount is 10 pages, I don't want to try and jump 10, right? I'll only jump the 3 pages that there are. Look at it carefully and you'll see that that's the logic actually being used here, right? So now we're ready. So I start building the unordered list, okay? The first button, right, still goes back to page 1, okay? Goes to the first page, no problem. Simple, easy, away we go. The second one, here's where we're going to use our jump amount. So this is a jump back, right? So I have my my tooltip here set to, you can hover over and get that nicely formatted tooltip. Same one we used when we hovered over yes and no for the patient, whether in a medical trial, to show the nicely formatted name of the medical trial, right? We're going to use the same effect here. So you can hover over this button and see it will step back how many pages, right? And away we go, right? So that's basically what this is going to do. Then we have the, the next button just goes to uh, the previous page. This is our just go back one page instead of stepping back multiple pages. Then our button in the middle, right, which once again shows our page index of total pages. And it as well is the one that brings up our modal, right? Our toggles our modal to allow them to change their preferred page size. Then going down the other side of the mountain, we first have our page index +1 go forward one page, then our jump forward, right? Depending on how many pages are left, it will be limited to that or our total jump amount. And finally, go to the very last page, right? So we've just given some extra buttons with extra options is basically what it comes down to. Okay, all right. So in the index action of all of our controls that has paging, now we need a second parameter, right? So coming to the patient's controller, coming up to the index, remember we added page. Now we also need a parameter for that page size. Okay, again, another nullable int. Right, so I'm going to stick it right beside page here. Okay, and then our hard-coded value for the page size. Okay, remember that was right down here near the end, where we hard-coded in this assumption that our page size would be 10. I'll replace that with this code, right? So we can use our page size helper to get our page size, right? And then our view data will hold the page size ID, right? That's our select list. So that's how we make sure we add it to there. So if they bring the pop-up modal, it actually has that data, right? Okay, so that would work, okay? And maybe I'll quickly run it to prove that it does. Now we've only set it up here on the patient's controller. Oh, I'm gonna get a build error or an error if I try to go to doctors, okay? But I won't. Okay, so now see how I can jump forward 10 pages? It's disabled going this way because I can't go backwards, but if I jump forward, right now I'm on page 11, I can go one at a time, right? I can still jump forward 10, but now I'm probably too close. Oh, no, I'm not, okay? Page 33, yeah. So now it says jump forward 2 pages. So it's smart enough to, as I get near the end, to reduce the number of the jump amount. I can jump back by 10 or ones, and away I go, or go back to the first and the last, right? I can click my drop-down list, change that to 10. There we go. So now I'm set to 10, right? Now I should get an error probably if I try to come to doctors. Yeah, because I'm missing that one parameter, right? Oh, I shouldn't have stopped. I could have done a quick. That's okay. We'll come up here. I have to add the page size to the parameters. And again, I'll do the same thing. I'll replace that hard-coded value for page size so I can use the one that by now should be in the cookie, right? There we go. So let me run it once more. Okay, how are we doing for time? Not too bad. We're almost done this part of the lecture. So now Doctor should be working, and I have my 10 pages, or sorry, my 10 per page, right? 10 records per page. I can jump forward and backward, right? I can't jump forward now, but I can jump back. Oh, I'm missing some Bootstrap styling there for some reason. Huh, isn't that interesting? I thought I had it in place. Okay, well, I'll get that fixed in a second here. All right, but we do have our pop-up modal. Just let me point out that whatever I set here, I have to live with when I come to patients, right? So that would be the final part of our demonstration on this is, as I say here, do we want the index to remember the preferred say size for each, right? As an alternate version, to remember the page size for each controller, we just have to add one little bit of code, right? Well, actually, it's more than one little bit, but you have to make one major change here. So we come to our page size helper, again, in our utilities, our page size helper, okay? And I just have a different version that manages this. So I'll basically replace the class with this updated version. The main thing I'll just point out here is we added controller name, right? So now we can set it up so that for each controller, by passing in the name of the controller, we can have it remember, right? And that's what it does down here then, right? So with our cookie helper, we set a cookie, and of course, cookie names do need to be unique like any other dictionary, right? When you have a key value pair, the keys should be unique. So I'm using the controller name and then the page size value, right? And that is going to be the name for my actual cookie. Or if I don't have one yet, I'll set it as the default value, right? And then down here, right, when we're pulling it out of the cookie, I'll check to see if it's in one specifically for this controller. And if not, I'll use the one for my default value, right? So that's the main changes that we're going to save it as a default value or one specifically for the controller if we've been given the controller name. Then when we come back here to, for example, in the patient's controller, right? When I call this, notice it's not happy until I make the change, I could hard code in patients, right? That's the name of my controller. And that would now work. I could go and do the same thing in doctor, right? But you know what? Um, wouldn't it be nice, as I say over here, wouldn't it be nice if the controller knew its own name without us having to put it in? That way, when I copy and paste this code in multiple controllers, I don't have to worry about customizing it with the actual name of the controller, right? If it was only that, I would say, well, maybe this isn't really worth bothering with. But we're going to see down the road there are a tremendous number of situations where it's helpful if the controller can know its own name. And not only that, if it can actually also know what action was called, right? So we could add, this bit of code in the controller, right? And then we could just say controller name. But you know what? There's an even better approach I'm going to share with you. And we're going to start doing this more and more. We're doing object-oriented programming here, right? Why don't I give my controller the ability to be smart, right? So I'm going to add a custom controller. It's going to inherit from the controller class, but it's going to have some superpowers, right? It's going to be self-aware, knowing its own name, right? And then I'll be able to get away without having to do this customized naming here. So I'm eventually going to have a number of custom controllers. So instead of just putting them in the controller class, I'm going to make yet another folder. I'm going to right click, add a folder. I'm going to call the folder custom controllers. And I'm going to right click. I'm going to add a new class in here, right? This, I'm going to call it my cognizant controller. Why cognizant? Well, it's self-aware, right? Okay, but it is going to inherit from controller. I was probably spelling that wrong. There we go. All right. So it's going to inherit from controller. Well, actually, I might as well get my code and put it in place. I only have a little bit of code for this at this point in time, right? So we're going to make the controller self-aware, knowing its own name and what action was called, right? Actually, we're going to build on this more later on, but for now, this is enough. So it'll have a controller name and an action name, right? Just internal strings, and that's fine. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come back to the patient's controller, right, where I was working. And what I'll do is I'll come right to the top of the controller. I'm going to say, instead of inheriting from controller, I'm going to inherit from cognizant controller. But of course, it just inherits from controller, so that's fine. But now my cognizant controller has this ability that I can just come down here and go controller name, bracket, bracket, right? And now it knows its own name, so I can just take this line of code, come back to my doctor's controller, okay? Paste it in here. I'm almost done, but I also have to make sure that my controller is a cognizant controller, knowing its own name and what action that it gets. Okay, all right, and that is the end of the demo if it runs and works properly. So now if I set for doctors a page size of 3, come to patients, yeah, it'll be my default, but I can set it to something else like 10, right? And then if I go back to doctors, see, it's remembering my preferred value for doctors. Patients remembers its own, but everything else is fully functional, right? So why do I have the styling here, but not on doctors? Huh, that is very strange. Anyway, I'll figure that out on the break, but I'm going to stop recording for now.